briefly, here's an overview of what I plan to cover in tonight's presentation. What our neighborhood has been experiencing, some more industry and TCEQ info, pollutants that have been found, and I'm going to conclude with some proposals and brief questions. My name's Krystal, and I'm a mother, and as this has been going on, some people call me Mama Bear, have protected my son. And I named this presentation Living an American Dream, and at the end, hopefully you'll find out why. Our family moved to San Antonio from a farm in May of 2013, and I noticed we started getting progressively ill, and what seemed like chronic allergies, the flu, we've had headaches. I started losing my balance. I figure skated for years and went to nationals several times, and whenever I came down here and moved here, I joined the roller derby team, and I'm a national skater. I was falling all over the place, and I remember telling my teammates, why am I falling? Why am I falling? And now it's starting to make sense. So I started talking to the neighbors, and they were all experiencing similar allergic symptoms and reactions, the shortness of breath, the coughing, the headaches. A lot of people have headaches. And I also noticed that this dust continued to present itself in our house. Notice on the right side there's a square missing. Vulcan representatives actually came into my house and took a tape lip sample. And what it showed in their results was silica, which causes silicosis, which is a deadly and uncurable, rapidly progressive lung disease. And also manganese was found in it, which is a neurotoxin and causes things like Parkinson's and other symptoms such as the flu, fever, shaking, chills, headache, and cough. So I decided to try this little experiment. I was like, okay, there's all this dust in the outside air and it's pushing into our homes. I'm going to try to settle this dust down inside of our house. So I closed a door and I was like, I'm just going to run this humidifier overnight. And when I opened the door the next morning, this is the sediment that showed in the humidifier. So from the intake, what it was pulling out of the air in our house, this is what showed the next morning. And I realized, that's whenever I really realized we have a problem. These are some nearby schools. So on the left, you'll see that's an elementary school. You can see the track out where cars park. There's not much traffic, but you can start to see where like the buses or people dropping their kids off circle around. And then on the left is James Madison High School. And that is an intersection where these trucks go that are leaving the quarry. That is an intersection. If they don't take 1604, they will go down the street. And so you can see all the dust at the intersection, the tracks that I'm talking about. And also what I did notice, and this is widespread, so we moved from the quarry so we could get some alleviation from these symptoms. But even though we moved, I still see whenever it rains and the rain comes down and starts to dry out, there's an even distribution of a fine sediment, almost a silt on our streets. And we moved far, I thought was far away from them, you know. And then after that dries and trucks and cars start traveling over these roads, it kicks that dust back up. And we will get respiratory symptoms within about 2 days. And I've told that to other people, and I was like, just pay attention to this. And sure enough, they'll come back to me and say, you were exactly right. That is whenever we start getting sick again. So October 19th of last year, there was what I call a dumping event. And there was this thick mystery dust that covered our neighborhood. All the pinpoints that you see in red, those are homes that reported damage, physical damage to their cars. There was something that sprinkled, it was like a salt and pepper shaker that came down with the rain, and it was so corrosive that it started eating away at the clear coats of cars. And people started getting your breathing difficulties. I cleaned up our car after I talked to TCEQ, and shortly after that, my eardrum ruptured. My eardrum had never ruptured in my life. The TCEQ investigated Alamo and Vulcan, And as a result of that investigation, the TCEQ could not pinpoint a source. And the lab analysis that they provided over 100 days later of this dumping event resulted in even more questions. So this is what a dumping event looks like. If you notice on the left-hand side, that's a car, and it looked like it was snowing when this happened. And then on the right is a tree that was in our backyard, and you can see the speckles from whatever this was. It was so toxic that it caused death on the leaves. So, also, when that dumping event happened, it covered the area, all those pinpoints that you saw, it covered the area of 2 elementary schools. The TCEQ did not notify the elementary schools that this had happened. They didn't, so whenever they took the samples, they didn't even determine the extent to where this went out. And the analysis showed, which was mailed to me 109 days later, fly ash, cement dust, Portland cement, limestone gypsum, glassy spheres, metal flakes, metal shot, rust, and rubber dust. So basically, it's like we were breathing in barbed wire. And after I did some personal research, I'll just break down what fly ash has. From my own research, I found that it contains very heavy metals in almost their purest forms, such as arsenic, lead, mercury, selenium. And the EPA considers fly ash as a threat to water supply and public health. So whenever TCEQ came by my house to take samples, I asked them, how are we supposed to clean this up? And the TCEQ told me, well, vinegar's been working for your neighbors. And the protocol is hazmat suits and probes. And this is still, as far as we know, they haven't notified the schools. And it continues to happen. There's been multiple more dumping events since that first one, and we still don't know what it contains. And the last one that was conducted that TCEQ took samples for was done so sloppily that the lab, the TCEQ lab in Austin, could not accept the samples.
When was the first one done? What year?
Last year was the first one. So all the things that were in it also contribute to pulmonary diseases, our short-term effects. Everybody was experiencing, I wouldn't say everybody, mostly everybody were experiencing some upper respiratory distress, different symptoms, headache, fatigue. These things cause pulmonary fibrosis, which is typically an occupational disease. So you see this type of disease in somebody that works in the manufacturing plants, but the people that are living in this 24 hours a day could be there 365 days a year. We have no protection. There are a lot of odd commonalities of some of the symptoms that people are experiencing in these neighborhoods. They include neurological, and all these are, some of them have been diagnosed with actual diseases. Neurological, respiratory, gastrointestinal, liver and blood problems, bone brittleness, bones are breaking easily, cardiovascular, developmental problems, reproductive problems. There are preterm births and miscarriages, and skin problems. So at the very top one, that's an MRI that was conducted. There was a neighbor that moved to the community in 2010. Free spirit, full of life, and then just after she moved there, started to get degeneratively not feeling well. Had some imaging done, showed some lesions starting in her brain, and that was the second time she went back in 2014 this year, and there's more lesions developing. So since she moved there, she got diagnosed with a rapidly demyelinating form of MS. And there's also people with Parkinson's symptoms and getting diagnosed with Parkinson's, and those are both a neurotoxic disease. The bottom slide is where, if you zoom into it, these are actually my son's lungs, but he started to develop, his pulmonologist counted 12 mucus plugs in his lungs. There's also some ongoing worker safety issues. There was an explosion at Vulcan last year, and several rounds of explosions, and all of our power went out. Of course, TCEQ wasn't notified, but this is a YouTube video of it. You can find it on YouTube. And then also recently at the Alamo Quarry, there was a semi-truck that was driving underneath that dirt road. So it goes under this bridge, okay? And it had a dump truck load on it. And somehow the hydraulics had lifted it up. It was on a semi. And it damaged the bridge as it was traveling. They go at very fast speeds there at Alamo. And that morning, that was a morning that picture was taken. School buses are going over that bridge. They never called it in for repair. Never. Next, TCEQ and industry. So the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality, they do have a mission statement. And it says that they strive to protect our state's public health and natural resources consistent with sustainable economic development. Our goal is clean air, clean water, and the safe management of waste. This is just a brief overview of what a limestone quarry is. They drill into the quarry wall to get these holes, and then they blast the rock away from the side. They then carry the rock to a crushing plant that goes down conveyor belts. They blend it, and the end product is proportioned either in stockpiles and sold as a commodity, or into asphalt and like the clinker that's made, that they use to make cement with. So this is a perfect example of the lack of TCEQ's enforcement. None of this started coming about and coming to light until until this recent dumping event from last year. So once that happened and that TCEQ went on site and did that investigation, then slowly these things have started to come to light. Vulcan recently had a disclosure of their violations, and it found a total of 28 violations that they reported just this year that have been ongoing since 1991. So if you were to stack those violations up back to back, that one violation from 1991, that's 23 years ago. So if you stack them up to back, cumulatively, that's 152 years of violations going on just at that facility. And whenever they renew their permits, whenever a facility renews their permits, TCEQ is supposed to do on-site inspections, and they're not catching these violations. So because of county pressure, there was a recent stormwater investigation, and the stormwater investigation ended June 2nd of this year, and it was the largest and most extensive, resulting in the most violations that this TCEQ region has ever seen. And it was because the whole investigation started because of county pressure. Federally, there were also violations of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and it is very unlikely that the TCEQ has notified the EPA of any of these violations. So for instance, following a rain event, the runoff from Vulcan, they should be catching it, showed a total suspended solid count of 13,600. The federal limit for discharges is 45. That was not called in as a spill, not followed up what happened, and the TCEQ hasn't done anything about it either. So these are the pollutants that we have actually found. Since I can't rely on TCEQ data, I started looking at aquifer data, soil data, anything that I could get my hands on. This is a website, it's through the EPA, and it's an environment mapper. You can go in and put in your zip code, and so what shows up right here is, this is actually from Alamo's stacks And I'd say 95% of the time you can just hit refresh. Sometimes the red square won't show up there. See, closer to the loop, that's 1604 right there. So closer to the loop, that's just like the legend at the top. I'd say 95% of the time this red square shows up, and that red square stands for toxic substances being released. Another problem is these facilities are on the recharge zone. So that is the most porous part. They've done there's haphazard conditions on their facilities where they're not maintaining their equipment, not maintaining their permits, and so they happen to be off the recharge zone. So any spills that they have, that's the most porous part that spills can get into our drinking water supply. So for instance, one of the studies that I was able to find was that chromium was found in Elm Waterhole Creek. And chromium is what was the whole Aaron Brockovich movie was about. So I don't know if you've seen that, but you see what those people go through, what they're exposed to, and it was the chromium. That's exactly what was found here in this joint SAWS study with USGS in 2014, or in 2012. And so they checked these two tributaries. The EW is the Elm Waterhole Creek, and that is the contributing tributary for Vulcan's stormwater. So anytime there's a rain event, their stormwater feeds into the Elm Waterhole Creek, and that's where chromium was found. So in closing, I have several proposals. There needs to be a better assessment of emissions, more enforcement of violations, more community engagement and awareness, and more local government engagement. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Okay.
Go ahead.
How's your son doing?
He's doing better. He does have a cough every once in a while, and I notice too, like whenever it's the sediment and it'll start to rise up, then he'll start to have his asthma problems, and we'll have to do his breathing treatments. But luckily, it's not as bad as it was. He wasn't living with us for about 4 months. Whenever we lived in that home, it tore our family apart, and we had to send him away to Lubbock to his grandparents' house just so I know he'd be safe.
You said the county eventually is putting pressure on Vulcan. Is the city doing anything or not? Or they have no ability to enforce anything, or they have no rules that they can enforce?
The city has not done anything that I'm aware of. I talked to the mayor and gave her the information about all these violations. And shortly after that, and the council members I emailed them to, shortly after that, they awarded Vulcan with passing an ordinance of awarding them with an annual contract of almost $100,000 for 2 years. Peter?
You listed a number of symptoms that your neighbors had shown that were coincident with some of the likely indications from exposure to some of these same contaminants. Mm-hmm. What can you say about causation? How sure are you that what was emitted by Vulcan and or anybody else was in fact the root cause of the symptoms?
I don't know for sure, because we still don't know what concentrations were actually emitted, because the TCEQ hasn't done proper testing. So right now, we don't know what's in the soil. We really don't know what these dumping events contain. And so until we have that information, it's hard for us to tell our doctors, hey, you need to test for this. We just have these symptoms, and our doctors are having to do this blind. We're having to do this blind, but we need some answers.
Where is the Alamo quarry?
There's actually 2 facilities side by side. So cumulatively, they can have a large impact. The total acreage is almost 2,000 acres together. So it's in northeast Bexar County. 1604 is our outer loop. So they're between like Green Mountain Road and O'Connor is where these two quarries that I've mentioned are, but there's other quarries and other cement places. I know there's a ready mix facility by our house that we moved to, and they have track out problems.
The TCEQ is not gonna, how should we say, monitor quarries. We lived near a quarry in Helotes, out on Chimney Creek, which is northwest of Helotes, and we complained for years on the blasting, causing cracks in our homes and the dust and the rocks in the front yard, and we hammered the TCEQ as a neighborhood, and they are not going to monitor a quarry, period. Then when the Vulcan mulch fire caught in 2007,
Yes.
I began to test the Helotes Creek, and I've tested it every year since 2007. And the pollutants that come from that quarry and go into our aquifer and into our drinking water are astronomical. E. coli's and total fecal coliforms, etc. And the TCEQ not only is not interested in monitoring it, but they close the window of people you can call and complain to until there's only one person at TCEQ that'll take your report, and he gives you lip service but does nothing. So it isn't just the Alamo quarry, it is any quarries, and the TCEQ is very permissive about what they do to our environment, and our drinking water and our air.
I completely agree.
Thank you so much.